Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the data strategy trial class offered by Professor Greg LeBlanc from UC Berkeley. I'm the host, Kate, for today's trial class, and I'm also the VP of Programs here at Harmony Plus. So before we start the trial class today, I'm going to introduce our company a little bit for you to understand more about what we are doing and who we are, okay? And I'm also trying to admit other people who are in the waiting room right now. Okay. Yeah, good evening, everyone. So we are Harmony Plus, and we are an education company here in Mountain View, Silicon Valley. And I know today we have parents and students join from, I think, all over the United States, and maybe some international students also from Canada, Singapore, and China, because I see many familiar names here. So we are official partner of leading universities and institutions here in the United States. So one of our most significant partner is UC Berkeley. We co-design and cooperate many customized programs for both local and international high school students and undergraduate students with UC Berkeley, specifically with High School of Business, with chemistry school and with UC Berkeley Global. So we're trying to leverage all the resources we have together with UC Berkeley to support as many students as possible. Yeah, if you can mute yourself, yeah, that would be really good. I'm going to mute all the audience right now. Okay, and then we also partner with Stanford Research Institute International, which is a research institute founded by Stanford University trustee, I think during 1950s, and we partner with them to offer programs to high school and middle school students. And we also partner with San Jose State University to do exchange programs for undergraduate students. So with all those resources we have, we try to provide top-notch programs to outstanding local and international students. So this is what we do. In Harmony Class, we use a hybrid learning platform for us to support all the students and also all the stakeholders in our ecosystem. So we provide education plus service, which means that we offer all kinds of the programs, but we also do future planning, consulting services to our middle and high school students. And also we do both online and offline programs, but due to COVID, for the recent 1 year, all the programs we conducted through online, but this also give our audiences and students more chance to interact with other outstanding students from all over the world. And we also provide classes using asynchronous and also asynchronous format. And then we also try to help the students to put the theory into practice. So all the programs we design and offer here are project-based learning, which means that the students were apply what they've learned in the class and then try to solve the real world problem by doing research, write a research paper, or participate in competitions. And then we have all the resources and guidance from top teachers and professors like Greg LeBlanc. And we also have endorsements from leading universities. By all the resources we have, we try to help the students build competitive advantage and let the students enjoy their continuous improvement. And for the students who are in our Harmony Class ecosystem, this is the amazing, result for them. Many students go to very top universities. As you can see, several amazing names here, including Berkeley, Yale, Columbia, Johns Hopkins, and etc. So we try our best to support students as much as we can. And I'm very glad that today we have the honor to invite Professor Greg LeBlanc from UC Berkeley to offer a trial class to our, even high school or even middle school students. So Greg is a star professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and he has fantastic education background, with 4 bachelor's degrees, 1 master's degrees, and studied 2 doctorate degrees. So his background is really impressive, and he's like genius professor. I think the only one I know. And then he is also the only interdisciplinary professor who teaches at School of Business, the School of Law, and also the School of Engineering. So before he teaches at UC Berkeley, I think starting from this year, he also get the invitation from Stanford University to teach their undergraduate economics students. And also he taught at Duke University, the University of Pennsylvania, and other top universities before. Besides the teaching experiences, Professor Greg is also the co-founder of an ad tech startup and also director and advisory board member to many startups like Skydeck, FinTech Hub, and many other companies. So Greg is also the first professor in the United States offering interdisciplinary blockchain courses. So I think the students and parents here are very lucky today. You're going to, have the chance to interact with professor directly and listen to the very, impressive data strategy course, which Berkeley students and Stanford students can take by their, undergraduate or, graduate studies. So I think the students for middle school and high school students here, try to be as focused as you can. And I encourage you to open your camera to have the chance to interact with the professor. Okay, so I want to maybe pass my microphone to Greg. So Professor Greg LeBlanc, can you first maybe say hi to everyone? And then
Hello.
we can start the trial class.
Okay, well, let me share my screen. I think, here we go. You've got to stop and then I can start sharing my screen. Okay, here we go. Now, this is going to be a bit of a rushed class. I thought we could spend some time talking about my theory of education and all that, but we did that at an earlier session. And so I thought I'd just dive right in and kind of give people a taste of what it's like to take a class in something like data strategy. So I think Kate did a pretty good job of describing my background and where I teach and so forth. I've also done a lot of work for different companies and governments and so forth all around the world, particularly in China. And yeah, so when I talk about data science, I like to go back because I've been doing this now for a long time. I've been teaching courses on data science, data strategy. I've been teaching courses on what we call digital transformation. I've been teaching statistics probably for 30 years. I started teaching statistics when I was back at Wharton as a grad student. And I was asked by the dean of the Haas School to reinvent statistics, which had been a very kind of boring class. Nobody really liked it. It was kind of like doing, it was like brushing your teeth. It was something you had to do, but nobody really looked forward to it. And so we kind of reinvented that course to make it seem really relevant so people could see, why is it that you need to know this? Why is it so important in business today? And when I began that class, which was back in 2010, I began by talking about this guy right here. Now, some of you may know this person. Usually if you're from outside of the US, you have no idea who this person is. But if you're from the Bay Area, you probably know this person. You may have read about this person, seen a movie about this person. Okay, and this is the book and this is the movie. I guess it's getting pretty old now, but I still recommend this movie. This movie was an inspiration for a lot of people, not just in sports, but also in business throughout. And that's because what he was able to do, this one guy who didn't even have a college education, he was accepted to Stanford and never went. He went right into sports. What he was able to do was completely transform his organization and turn it from an unsuccessful organization into a successful one. Okay, now how did he do this? What was this transformation? And why was this so important? And why was it so inspirational? And why is it that pretty much every business person in America has been inspired by what this guy did? And what he did really is he took an organization where every single decision was made based on gut, feeling, experience, emotion, and turned it into an organization where every single decision had to be supported by evidence, by data, and by science. Right now, we use the term management science, but most of management is actually not very scientific, at least until the last 20 years. For the last 20 years, principles of science have been spreading like wildfire through business. Now, it's not to say that gut doesn't matter, right? We still need people like Elon Musk who have, gut feeling about how the world's going to change. But when it comes to most decisions, you can amplify your gut instinct by leaning on powerful tools drawn from statistics, from analytics, from programming, from data science and software. Okay, and so I like to say in some of my other classes that every single company is becoming a software company. Every single company is becoming a data company. And you can't really run a business now if you're not familiar with these tools. And so what to me is really shocking is that at most high schools in America, now some of our local schools are an exception, but most schools in America, students have no exposure to statistics. They have no exposure to statistics. To me, this is absolutely astonishing, right? Like, how can you make a decision? How can you even figure out, should you apply to this college, or, should you join the sports team, or, how do you cross the street, right? I mean, you need to have some familiarity with statistics, and we waste our time learning all sorts of other stuff that's not going to have a whole lot of use. I mean, trigonometry is fun, but how many of our students, how many of our children are actually going to, become rocket scientists? Not a lot, right? And you don't really need it for that anyway. I took trigonometry. I took spherical trig. I went to Caltech a long time ago, 40 years ago, and we learned spherical trigonometry. And when I left Caltech, I've never gone back and used it ever. Okay, and I wish I'd learned statistics instead. It would have been much more useful. Okay, but even so, even if you've learned statistics, there's still data science, and data science is a little bit different from statistics, and it's typically not taught even in those schools where they teach statistics. Okay, so this is really what he did. He took decisions, and the decisions he started with were what we call HR decisions. So anybody who's in business, they all know what HR is. HR is about how you select people for your team, how you hire, how you recruit. And in the world of baseball, these people, the HR people, were called scouts. Okay, they're called scouts. And so a scout is someone who's been in the game for a long time. They have a lot of experience, and they evaluate players. They look at them, and they say, oh yeah, this player reminds me of some other player who I really liked in the past, who turned out to be really good. Or maybe they look at another player and they say, this player doesn't look very good. They remind me of some other player that turned out to be really bad. So they're doing some kind of pattern recognition. And if you look at this, there's a scene from the movie that I'm not going to play you, where one of the scouts actually has all these crazy hypotheses. He says, if a baseball player has an ugly girlfriend, then he can't be a very good baseball player, right? So, like, this is the kind of logic that people were using. Right? It wasn't grounded in science, wasn't grounded in evidence. And so he said, from now on, we've got to support every decision with data. Now, what this meant was that he needed to hire a new type of person. He needed to hire people, not people who'd been playing baseball their whole lives, but people who maybe they didn't know anything about baseball, but they knew about math. And so one of the top people that he hired, in fact, his number two, was someone who came from the Philippines and had zero exposure to baseball until he came to Berkeley as a graduate student. And then only after he got his PhD in behavioral economics was he recruited by this baseball team. And this guy actually is now the general manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers, very powerful individual, okay? And so this is sort of a theme: amateurs replacing experts, people with math skills replacing people who have, gut and experience. And it's not just in baseball, it's in banking, okay? It's in energy, it's in oil, it's in marketing, it's in pretty much every company. You go to Facebook, you go to LinkedIn, you go to Square, right? They're all young people. They're all young people who are supplanting the old people. And the old people are working at the places that are going out of business. Okay, and it's because they're showing up with a skill set that's valued in today's world, and not a legacy set of skills that some universities think are valuable. Okay, I will mention UC Berkeley is at the forefront of this new movement. We've created a new data science school, right? That's separate from engineering, separate from business, separate from law. And it pretty much and it got a huge anonymous grant for a couple $100 million to fund this thing. And we fully expect every single undergraduate at Berkeley to take some kind of data science class, whether you're a poetry major, engineering, doesn't matter. We expect you to understand it, because this is the new logic. This is the new critical thinking. This is how you can read the newspaper and understand what's going on, and not be swayed by manipulative techniques, not be swayed by things that make you fear or get excited, or tap into your emotions or your prejudices. Okay, so we really think that everybody needs to understand this stuff. Okay, now in this class, we're going to dig a little deeper than I think we would expect a typical undergraduate with an English major to dig into, but we're not going to dig as deep as we would expect somebody who is a data science major or statistics major. We're going to just have a very, very cursory view over the top. And what Billy Beane, that's his name, was able to do by adopting these scientific methods, primarily for recruiting, but then also for other things, he was able to generate outperformance. Okay, so on this graph, you can see that they had one of the lowest payrolls. So on the x-axis, you see payrolls. They one of the lowest payrolls in baseball, and they had one of the highest winning percentages. Okay, so pretty much every other team, you had a strong correlation between how much you spent on your players and how much you won, except Oakland, right, was able to play like a championship team with the budget of a bottom tier team. Okay, that's what they're able to do, squeeze extra juice out of the lemon. And they're able to do this across the board, right? Not just with HR, but with marketing, operations, right? Pretty much every aspect of the business. Okay, so, when a student graduates with this talent, with these skills, they can jump right in. Now, of course, you can't just have mathematical techniques. You got to understand a little bit about the business. And so this effect, we call it the Moneyball effect. It's happened not just in sports, but also in media, finance, education. We now talk about the Moneyball of education. Some universities are becoming a little bit more scientific when it comes to who they admit, right? Do you want to admit the people who are going to, be more likely to succeed, right? Or do you want to just rely on your gut and admit the people who, you like? Okay. So this is something that's happening in the real world. Okay, now what exactly is this technique that I'm talking about? What exactly is this technique, okay, which we call data science or machine learning? And to be clear, anybody who's ever used Excel to do a regression has already used some form of artificial intelligence, right? They've done machine learning. So pretty much everybody who's done anything in business has done some form of machine learning. So what do we mean when we talk about data science? Well, it really boils down to pattern recognition. So I mentioned that these recruiters were doing pattern recognition, but they were doing it in a very unsystematic way. They would just kind of look at somebody and they would kind of feel like they resembled somebody else. This technique actually comes up with a quantitative measure of similarity, right? So you can figure out whether they really are more likely to be in one category or another. And so if we're doing what we call a classification, then what we're trying to do is we're trying to sort into different buckets. Okay, a very simple technique. So suppose that, a college admits a bunch of students. Some of them turn out to be good students. Some of them turn out to be bad students. Okay, suppose a bank lends money to customers. Some of them turn out to be good customers. Some of them turn out to be bad customers. Suppose you hire a bunch of employees. Some of them turn out to be good employees. Some of them turn out to be bad employees. Okay, so what we'd like to do is we'd like to, when we look at a new person that we're contemplating hiring or contemplating lending money to or contemplating letting into our school, we'd like to look at their characteristics and see if they more closely resemble the people who were good or the people who are bad. Okay, and to do this, right, all we need is a spreadsheet. All we need is a spreadsheet, and all we need is a whole bunch of data. Okay, and that data is going to come in the form of rows and columns. So here we have rows and columns. So this is a bank. Bank's looking at a bunch of customers that they've loaned money to in the past. And it looks like some of them they had to write off the loans, others they didn't. Okay, and so here are the attributes or characteristics that they know about this person. They know their age, they know their employment status, they know the balance of the loan. Okay, and so each row is what we call a vector. And the goal of the software that we use, and we don't use complicated software here, we just use some pretty basic software, no coding necessary. It's software in a box. Okay, with the software, you'll basically sort into these different buckets and create what we think of as a boundary between the two different categories. So that if someone comes in, we can say, oh, you're on this side of the boundary or that side of the boundary, okay? So here's our spreadsheet. These are our variables. Those are our predictive variables. And then this is what we call a target feature or the dependent variable. That's the thing we're trying to predict. So we need data, historical data, and the data has to have revealed the status of the individual in this training data. And so I like to say that, it boils down to two things, training and scoring. Training and scoring. These are the two steps involved in data science. You need training data, okay? Without that, you've got nothing. And then you feed the training data into this model, and the model spits out, right, predictions. Okay, so anybody who's ever applied for a loan, you know that there's this thing called the Fico Score, and the Fico Score is just exactly this. It combs through all the other people that have borrowed money in the past and looks at, how many times did they pay late and how many times did they go over their credit limit and, how much did they borrow. And then based on that information, they say, oh yeah, you're somebody who's likely to default, or you're somebody who's not likely to default. Fico Score is a scoring model built on training data. And every single bank in America has to contribute their customer data to this gigantic pool of data. And then, Fico uses this. You've got Experian and TransUnion and all these other companies. They do something very, very, very similar. Okay, now normally I should say, I've been talking for a long time without anybody interrupting or asking questions. When we have the real class, okay, the real class is much more interactive, right? So, people are asking questions. If something doesn't make sense, you stop me, you interject, you ask a question, okay, and then we have a discussion. That's really how it works, at good university classes. Professor's not just talking. Otherwise, you might as well just watch a recording, and I don't really need to be here, right? I can just record it and go to sleep, and everybody can watch it. So that's really the importance of having, this synchronous learning, which we still cling to, because, otherwise just watch a bunch of YouTube videos. All right. So, during our class, last year we had a lot of interaction, we had a lot of Q&A, we had a lot of back and forth, because that's really the only way to make sure it makes sense to you, is to make sure that you understand it in your own language. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're trying to create a boundary. And this is the boundary that we carve through the training data. So then if somebody pops in, some new customer, and they pop in right here with these characteristics where my little cursor is, we're going to predict that they're more likely to be a white square. And if they come in here, we're going to predict that they're more likely to be a black dot. And then we use this prediction to guide our decision making. Okay, so sometimes it's called a prediction boundary, sometimes it's called a decision boundary, depending on what we're doing with it. Okay. Now, let me give you some examples of how this has been super powerful. And by the way, I should mention, I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, but finance is one of these areas where you just see a massive application here. A good friend of mine who started a company just a few years ago, 2016, he just sold it for $3 billion. Okay, $3 billion. And it's like the simplest business. He's an English major. Okay, he's an English major, went to Northwestern. And he basically said the mortgage system is broken. It takes a week to figure out whether somebody is going to, whether the property has got impairments on it. And he was like, well, that's stupid. Like, why do we need a week? Why don't we just do it in 7 seconds? And so he just used a little machine learning, spat it out. He had 15 employees just 3 years ago. He had 15 employees. Now he's got 3 billion. Okay. And it's just simple as can be. It's just the stuff that I've been teaching in my class for 10 years. Okay. A good friend of mine just said, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to apply a little bit of machine learning to a very, very simple problem. Now let's go back in time, because this is not a new thing. And take a look at this bank here. This is called Signet Bank. Now I know none of you have heard of Signet Bank because it doesn't exist anymore. Signet Bank was the 350th largest bank in America. And it very quickly became the largest credit card issuer in the world. Okay, now how do you go from number 350 to number 1? How do you go from number 350 to number 1? Well, same way that the Oakland Athletics did. You use a little bit of data science. Okay, so what did they do? They said, all of our competitors are doing the same thing. They're all using this Fico score to determine who to give loans to. Everybody below a threshold gets no loan. Everybody above a threshold gets lots of loans. We think that there's some gems. We think there's some hidden diamonds buried in that pile of rejected applicants. We think they're there. And all we need to do is figure out who they are. Now, the problem is, how are you going to figure out who they are? Right? If nobody's ever loaned them any money, then how are you going to know whether they're any good for it? So what they did is they loaned out a bunch of money. They printed about 1 million credit cards. Actually, they didn't do that many at first. They did I think it was like 50,000. They sent out 50,000 credit cards to people with bad credit scores. Okay. And of course, what happened is most of those people didn't pay back their loans. Most of those people were, didn't have the money. They didn't pay it back. And so it turned out to be defaults. But there was a small percentage of them that paid back their loans. Right. So now we have variance. We have variation. We have variation in the dependent variable. We have some that repaid, some that didn't. And then all they had to do was take a look at those people and figure out, like, what do the people who repaid have in common? What do the people that didn't repay have in common? And then let's just, going forward, just lend to those people. Okay. So the only way that they were able to do this was to go out and acquire all this data. It's like paying for data. They had to book a loss. The CEO was in trouble. The stockholders were freaking out. The Wall Street was freaking out. Like the people who worked there were freaking out. Everybody's freaking out. I know a guy who used to work at Capital One. He now actually works for that mortgage company. He was describing this. And he said, everybody thought they were crazy initially. But once they got that data, they were the only bank in the country that had this data. And so they were able to have a monopoly on kind of subprime credit card borrowers for many years. Okay. So if you understand this, right, and this is just, it's not complicated data science, it's just go get some data, look it over, figure out what the pattern is, and then make your decisions based on that pattern. You got to know what question to ask, and then you got to know what data has the answer to the question, then you go get it. That's why I think, the purpose of this course is not simply for people to learn these data science techniques, because that's not enough. If your child learns the data science techniques and they stop there, then they'll be working at the bottom end of the organization. Okay, data scientists make good money. They can make $100,000 straight out of undergrad for sure, but they're just doing what they're told. Okay, it's important for them to understand, why are they doing this? What are they looking for? Okay, and it's those people who understand a little bit of the technical and a little bit of the business. Those are the ones that get ahead today. At Haas, I like to say that we teach people at the interface of tech and business. And if you can sit at that interface of tech and business, you will never, ever, ever be unemployed. And if you don't like your job, you can just quit and you'll have 10 jobs waiting for you if you can sit at that interface. Okay, if all you know is one, then, okay, it's a little bit more difficult. Okay, then you've limited yourself. But if you can sit between those two skill sets, and I remember McKinsey came out with a prediction about 15 years ago. They said, we're going to have a shortage of data scientists in this country, about 1 million data scientists by 2020. And it turns out that's not true. All the boot camps and all the universities have responded, cranking out data scientists. And so McKinsey changed their tune just a few years ago and said, no, actually, the real shortage is in data savvy business people, right? People who understand business and people who understand data, right? So that doesn't mean you got to be a data science major. Doesn't mean you have to be a business major, but it means that no matter what you do, if you want to be someone who succeeds in Silicon Valley, you want to have a little bit of both those skills. Okay. And of course, a data scientist is usually someone who knows statistics. They know a little bit of software, a little bit of coding, and a little bit of domain expertise.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Going back to that bank example that I had, you said that they asked a bunch of questions. They compiled a list of questions to ask. How did they find these questions?
That's a great question. So, there's two ways you can do this. One is you rely on organically generated data, right? Data that just kind of streams in. I can find data about pretty much every American for like $2. I can know how many people live in your household. I can know your political preferences. I can know pretty much everything. Back then it was a little more expensive. Okay, that's kind of organic data. But targeted data acquisition. And so that sort of approach is what we call data-driven discovery. So where you just have a whole bunch of data and then you just kind of look for patterns in the data. And that can be super useful. The alternative to that is you have a whole bunch of hypotheses. Like I think people who work 2 jobs are more likely to pay back. I think people who, went to university are more likely to pay back. And so then that leads you to ask certain targeted questions. And so data science is really a combination of the two. It's like you've got the hypothesis-driven inquiry, which is like traditional science. And then you've got data-driven discovery, which is you just collect a ton of data, random data, and then you look for patterns. So they did a little combination of the two. And the way in which you would understand what questions to ask is, and what data to collect, is that you have to have a little bit of domain expertise. Okay, you have to know a little bit about banking. You have to have, a little bit of common sense to think about like, hey, why do people default? Why do people not pay back their loans, right? If you have medical problems, you have family problems, that kind of stuff. And the beautiful thing about this is that when you do this in a formal way, when you put your model, you make your model explicit with rows and columns, then you can delete the columns that are either illegal or unethical, right? So you can if you have someone's race, okay, as a column in your database, or ethnic origin, or religion, or any of those things that are prohibited, then if you tell a human being, a human loan officer, oh yeah, I don't consider that. Oh yeah, okay, I won't. You can't make them do that, right? You can't, once they see it, they can't unsee it, right? So, we see all sorts of discrimination happening in college admissions, right? And in lending and in, hiring, we see a lot of discrimination. And that happens when you have a human being making the decision, okay? Because they can't censor, they can't delete little cells in their brain. They're going to do what they're going to try, but they can't. But when you have software, you just go in there, you delete it. Okay, so the Fair Credit Reporting Act says, like, you can't look at religion, you can't look at ethnic origin. I have a friend who is a startup, and what they do is they lend money to students who come to America from abroad. And he said that the single biggest predictor of default, and he told me, don't ever tell anybody, right, is what country you come from. It's like super predictive. But he said, we're not allowed to use it. So we just delete it from the data, even though it would be super helpful. Okay, we're not allowed to use it. Okay, so let me follow up on that question. This friend of mine who created the mortgage company, his first company actually was created back in 2007. Remember, he's an English major from Northwestern, and he and another friend of mine, they thought, hey, we got these call centers all around the world. They were consultants. They were looking to be, when you move to Silicon Valley as an adult, you just want to start a company. So they're, all right, we're going to start a company. And we need an idea. And they remembered that these call centers had very high turnover, whether it's in the US, whether it's in China, whether it's in India. People show up, they work in these call centers, and then they quit after like 6 months on average. And so his idea was like, hey, why don't we figure out a way to get people to spend twice as long on the job, like 12 months instead of 6 months. If we can do that, then these companies, they can cut their recruiting budget in half and their training budget in half and everything else. It'd be like, great. It'd be a massive, massive improvement to their processes. And, so when they looked at how people hired for these jobs, they realized that these jobs were basically, the recruiters were using human intelligence. They were using carbon-based decision-making. And so their great idea was like, let's just go and look at the data. So they approached a couple big companies and said, hey, give us all your HR data, right? So every company has basically, software like from Workday or some other companies, Salesforce, et cetera, and that tracks the identity of the people who work there and their productivity and their longevity on the job. And they said, let's just take that data and just comb through it and see if there's any patterns. And they were able to find a whole bunch of patterns that predicted how long somebody was going to stay on the job. And then they were like, just hire these people, don't hire these people. And boom, magically, you increase the life expectancy of the employee. That's what we say, life expectancy, because it's rooted in the field of insurance. That's where this stuff comes from. Okay, the insurance industry had to come up with this stuff back in the 1700s, probability and statistics and so forth. But they weren't done yet, because that's just data that was collected for compliance reasons. So then they said, well, let's figure out like what are the kind of things that we think might predict longevity. So this gets back to your question. Okay, that's kind of call center I want to work at. Okay, so so they went and asked all these professors of industrial psychology and they asked all these HR managers, and they said, hey, what do you think matters? And they had all these theories, all these hypotheses, like, how long have they been unemployed? How many previous jobs did they have? What's their education level? They used these criteria. And so they said, all right, well, we're going to start testing that stuff by creating a questionnaire, asking everybody these questions, and then tracking them going forward to see if they have any predictive value. Okay, and what they were able to discover was that a lot of the ideas that these human resource people were working with were bad ideas. So for instance, there was a call center in India, and this call center in India, the head of the call center said, we don't like to hire women because women get married, young women get married, and then they quit. So we like to hire men. So they looked at the data and they found that men quit at a higher rate. And they showed this to the HR manager. HR manager said, get out of my office. You're stupid. You don't understand India. Get out of here, right? Well, okay, fine. So that guy's going to be out of a job and his company's going to go bankrupt. Whatever, like if you don't want to face facts, you don't want to look at the data, and you just want to believe what you want to believe. Well, then you're not going to last very long in a competitive environment. On the other hand, there were a lot of American companies, maybe because they had seen that movie, they were like, oh yeah, bring it on. Like, this is great. And these were all these counterintuitive findings. People who had been unemployed for a long period of time, they turned out to be really good hires. Even though everyone thought that if you're unemployed for a long period of time, that means you're going to be a horrible employee. But it turns out that this meant they were really good employees. Maybe they were having babies. They were just taking some time off. Okay. And then when they finally got a job, they were glad to have it. Okay. Again, there might be theories, but who cares? If it works, it works. That's the key to data science. Okay. And this is my favorite insight that they came up with. This gets right to the heart of the question that you asked. It turns out that one of the most powerful predictors was the browser that you used to apply for the job. The browser that you used to apply for the job. Okay. Now, was this a question? Did they ask you what browser do you use? No, they didn't ask that question. This wasn't a question. This was just a column of data that was accidentally left in the data set. It's called metadata. It's just something that, when you run a website, you got to know what browser people are using so you can configure the website so that it works on the phone or it works on the laptop, the dimensions, and there's not text spilling out over the screen and so forth. So this is just something that it's like data exhaust, we sometimes call it. Data exhaust, stuff that just gets generated and which normally just goes up into the atmosphere. But if you capture this data exhaust and look at it, you might actually find some patterns. Super cool. Let me give you one other example from the world of finance, and then I'll give you one last example, and then we'll go. I always overestimate how many slides I can get through in a short period of time. This is a company called Tala. Now, they're based out of Southern California, but they operate in countries like Mexico and the Philippines and Kenya. And what they do is they lend money to people who don't have any credit history. Okay? They don't have any employment history. They don't have any tax history. In fact, they don't even exist, right? Because in some countries, you don't even have an ID, like a social security number or anything, right? You're an undocumented person. So if somebody's completely undocumented and we can't even prove that they have a job, like how are you going to generate training data that will help you to predict, right, their payment history? So if you lend to a bunch of people, and half of them repay and half of them don't repay, and you don't know anything about them, well, then you don't have a decision rule that you can use going forward. So how do you collect data on these people? Well, everybody has a phone, and your phone is spitting out data exhaust nonstop. Your data is cranking out, your phone is cranking out data about your location, when you wake up in the morning, where you are, right? What apps you have, who are your friends, how much time do you spend on Facebook, how much are you texting? Like all that stuff is in your phone. And so all they do is say, download this app and let us kind of monitor what you're doing. And then they use that data to predict whether you're going to be a good customer. So location data is probably among the most useful data for evaluating people's behavior out there. So this is something if you go and look in your Facebook page, you'll find this. This is from my Facebook page. Okay. And this is just one day in my life, pre-COVID, I should say. This is a pre-COVID day. This is just kind of what I would, before COVID, before I got this microphone and this camera and all this other stuff hanging out here, I was pretty much, on the road a lot. And this shows you, right, a day in my life. Okay. Now I want you to imagine if you're a bank and you're trying to figure out, nothing about this person other than their location. Do you have enough information here to evaluate this person for a loan? I think you do. Because look, this person leaves Berkeley, they're in their car, they go around traffic because obviously they're using Waze. And then their first stop of the day is at LinkedIn headquarters. Okay. And they're there from like 10 to 12. Then they head over to Google headquarters. And they're there from like 12 to 2. And then they go to Facebook headquarters from 2 to 4. Okay. So look, what do you think? I mean, do you think this person's probably a pretty good credit risk or not? Now, again, we could run a model to find out, but my guess is probably, unless this guy's stealing cars out of the parking lot of these 3 places, right? I mean, this person's, in fact, we can tell because we don't just know that they're at Facebook headquarters. We know like what meeting room they're in and who they're meeting with, because those people also have Facebook. Okay, so Facebook is in a much better position to make a loan than Bank of America, because they know more about you than Bank of America. Okay. You can evaluate someone's personality from their Facebook. You can evaluate whether they're conscientious or not. Now, of course, this person then went on to a wine store, so I don't know about that. That's a little dubious. And then they went and spent 4 hours at the Opera House, clearly pre-COVID. So what does that tell you? Do opera lovers make better credit risks? Do wine drinkers make better credit risk? Well, that's an easy question to answer. We just comb through our data. We look at who repaid, who didn't. And if it has predictive value, we incorporate it into our model. And that's not illegal. There's nothing illegal about using someone's location data, right, to evaluate them for a loan. Okay, so very, very powerful stuff. I know another guy. He created a bank called Earnest, and he went to Harvard Business School. And on the way out of Harvard Business School, he applied for a loan, and they said no, because your credit rating was no good. Now think about this: you're graduating from Harvard Business School or Harvard Medical School. I mean, and your model says no. They were just using Fico Score. So this guy created a bank, and the bank said, we're going to look at your resume. We're going to look at your CV, and we're going to use that. And most banks don't even look at that. They looked at that. They said, yeah, you went to Harvard School, you boom. Same thing with SoFi. SoFi said, you went to Stanford, you get a loan. Henry, you got a question?
Yeah, I had a question. I was thinking, you mentioned like maybe how an opera, like if you go to opera, maybe that would have an impact on whether you are a good person to loan to. But how would you know whether there is any other factors that affects that? Like, how would you specifically determine that it is you going to opera that affects whether you will get a loan or not?
Okay, so from the perspective of the customer, or from the perspective of the bank?
Of the bank.
So the bank doesn't need to have a theory. The bank doesn't need to have a causal explanation. All the bank needs is a prediction. That's it. That's the difference between data science and statistics. So in statistics, you have a null hypothesis, and you test the hypothesis to see if it works. So for instance, with COVID, right, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that if you are vitamin D deficient, you're much more likely to die of COVID. If you have gum disease, you're much more likely to die of COVID. If you have diabetes, you're much more likely to die of COVID. Now there we have some pretty good theories that can explain that, but there are other things that we don't really understand. So for instance, people who take antidepressants are much less seriously affected by COVID. Okay. In China, they discovered in Wuhan in the early days that people who wore glasses were less likely to get COVID. Okay. And so this is all just in the data, right? It was just in the data. You just kind of look through the data and you have a whole bunch of columns. Wears glasses, don't wear glasses, skin color, dark, light, exercises, yes or no, body mass index, right? And so you have all this data, and then you can just comb through it and figure out what the risk indicator is. And then you make a prediction about whether or not somebody's likely to get COVID or not. So now we can do an x-ray of your chest when you first get diagnosed and predict whether you're going to wind up on a ventilator a week later. Okay. And so with these predictions, we do the prediction first, worry about the theory later. Let some scientist write an academic article about it. If opera lovers are better customers when it comes to borrowing money, we don't care why. It doesn't matter. It's not our problem. Now, the thing you have to worry about is that if people discover that the bank is using this criteria for lending decisions, then people will start to game it, right? So when this article was published in The Economist, it was people started to wonder, oh, wait, what happens when people read this? They're all going to start using Chrome. And then this prediction will go away. Well, it didn't happen, because most of the people who apply for these kinds of jobs, they don't read The Economist. And so the prediction still works. Okay. Now, my favorite example of this, and this is the last one I'll leave you with, is I don't know if you're familiar with Li Kai-fu. Li Kai-fu is one of the top VCs in China. He used to be the head of Google in China, and he came to Berkeley, and we met with him, and he's invested in a lot of fintech startups in China and in Southeast Asia. And he said, these companies, they use all sorts of data to predict whether someone's going to be a good borrower. I mean, in fact, Alipay, right? and WeChat, those are the best, most solvent, most solid lenders in the entire financial system over there, because they use so much data, right, to make predictions about your behavior and your repayment rates. And he said, one of the fun things that they discovered was that a super powerful predictor of your repayment rate is, how do you manage your battery? How do you manage your battery, right? So I remember when I was in China, my battery would always run out around 9 a.m. because, you know, you're on WeChat like pretty much from the moment you wake up until, you know, until the moment you go to sleep. And so by the time it was like 9 o'clock, I was like running, I didn't have an iPhone 12. I had like an iPhone 9. I was like running out, and I had to find like a battery somewhere. I had to go to a restaurant, you know, coffee shop, find a battery, or carry on a cord and stuff. And so apparently if you let your battery go all the way down to 0, you're the kind of person that's less likely to repay your loan on time. You're more likely to forget to pay your loan. And so they actually would look at that. They would look at your battery life management, and that would factor in not just your job, not just your income, not just your all the other stuff, but, you know, how do you behave with respect to your phone? And it's super easy to pick that up. Uber for a while actually used to charge higher prices to people when their phone was dying. They could pick that up, right? So, you know, your phone just spills out so much information. Okay, so I'm gonna skip all this stuff. This is all interesting stuff, but we don't have time for it. I just want to end with one question.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you talked a lot about when it comes to hiring a person.
Yeah.
And you talked about how much info they get. So I wanted to know, like, more specifically, how much info are they allowed to have? And since you talked about like location and stuff like that, which is can be considered personal. So what are the ethics involved into this?
Well, there's the law and there's the ethics, and those are separate things. And the law actually allows these companies to do all sorts of things, right? And it's just a matter of you giving them permissions. So as long as you are logged into Facebook, they're tracking your location, as long as you've agreed to it, right? So there's terms of service. Now, if you don't want them tracking you, then you log out. Okay, it's that simple. I think most people are completely unaware of the amount of information that's being collected. They don't realize how much is being collected. I think some people, when they find out, they're kind of shocked and horrified. You know, other people like myself, it doesn't really bother me. You know, as far as I'm concerned, the more they know about me, the better they can, you know, serve up better banner ads and, you know, better news feed and so forth. Because I've kind of learned how to manage it, right? I don't waste time. Well, okay, I waste a little bit of time, but I try not to waste too much time watching like cat videos and stuff, right? But if you don't have self-control, then they're just going to exploit you. And so you have to kind of know, just like you have to know how to defend yourself against, you know, distorted news that's written by journalists who don't understand math and statistics. You have to also defend yourself against the manipulations of these big tech companies that are trying to get you to buy stuff and spend stuff. You know, one of the companies that is really, really good at using data are these casinos. Casinos they control every single aspect of your life. As soon as you walk into a casino, the oxygen levels, the sounds, the sights, the colors, the noises, everything is all designed to make you gamble. And so, you know, the more educated you are about this, the more you can protect yourself. Okay, now some countries, I remember when I've spoken to a lot of Chinese executives and Chinese government officials, when I talk about all this stuff, they're actually more worried about it than Americans. Even the government officials, they're not very excited. I have some slides in here that show you how, you know, the Chinese government the government has much better data on people than the US government. But the companies are the same. So like WeChat, they're the same as Facebook, same as Google's, you know, Baidu, they all have this information. And so, so no matter where you are in the world, Europe is a little bit more protective. You know, GDPR makes it a little bit harder for companies to collect data. But this is a debate that's happening right now. And I think that we're probably going to see a lot of changes. California just passed a law to try to protect people's privacy, but it's not, it just puts some hoops in the way. And it turns out the big companies are better at managing these hoops than the smaller companies. And so the smaller companies are disadvantaged. Bigger companies just keep doing what they're doing. So it's a great question. And in fact, in these slides, I have a bunch on what's called explainable AI and bias. So we're going to have a whole section in the course on bias. And bias is when the training data does not reflect the data that you're making decisions on. And, you know, all you're doing is replicating what the humans do. So if humans are racist, let's say, then the algorithm's going to be racist because it's just going to copy what the humans are doing. So you got to build in a system for overriding this. And so when we go back to those loans, the algorithmic lenders like Rocket Mortgage and so forth, they're actually, they do much less racial discrimination than a bank. They have baked in a mechanism for identifying bias and automating the elimination of bias. So again, we'll talk in the class about hiring because Google ran into some trouble because they just tried to copy the human hiring process, and the human hiring process was very, very biased. Okay, so I'll give you one last question. Some funny stuff. There's some biased stuff, right? All this, and I'll just end with this last example just to show you how important this is, even if you want to go into government. So when Mayor Michael Bloomberg became the mayor of New York City, he's a very technically savvy guy. He had a company called Bloomberg, which is a data company, software company, made billions of dollars at it. And so when he showed up at New York City as a mayor, he asked people, hey, who's in charge of our data? And they just laughed at him. They were like, what do you mean? We don't have a chief data officer. We don't have a chief digital officer. We don't have any of this stuff, right? We're a city government. And coming from private sector, he was just kind of horrified. So one of the first things that happened after he got into office was there was a fire, and there was it was in a building that had all sorts of code violations, and the electrical sockets weren't installed right, and all sorts of stuff happened, and then the building burned down. People died. So he brought the person from licensing and inspection into his office, and he said, "Why didn't you inspect that building and save those lives?" And the guy said, "Hey, we got 800,000 buildings in New York City. It's going to take us 200 years to inspect all of them. Like, we can't inspect all of them. We can only inspect like, a couple a day." Okay. And so Bloomberg said, all right, you're fired, because that's not an acceptable answer in today's world, right? You can't ask for more money. You can't ask for more budget. You got to do more with less. So he brought in this guy who became the chief data officer of New York City. And I want you to think about how you would solve this problem, because if they can only inspect 1% of the buildings in any given month, which ones should they inspect? Should they inspect randomly? Or should they inspect the buildings that are most likely to catch on fire? Probably, you want to inspect the ones that are most likely to catch on fire. Well, how do you know which ones are most likely to catch on fire? Well, New York City's been around since 1640. And so you've got like lots and lots and lots of data on buildings that have burned down and ones that had code violations. And so all you have to do is go back and look at 400 years worth of data and figure out like which buildings are the ones that burn down. And then go inspect those. It's so simple, right? It doesn't require more people, doesn't require more resources. It's just, instead of going out and inspecting building 9, 12, and 56, you inspect building 15, 86, and 103. And then you catch a higher number of violators, you're more effective. Okay. And so, when I go around and talk to governments, and I've actually, those of you who are from China, I've talked to Hubei, Hebei, talked to government Wuhan. I've talked to, Heilongjiang, Zhejiang, like every government province about how, in a government, if you want to make good decisions, you've got to get all this data into one central location. And what these companies and these governments do is they have all the data in these silos. So before you can put together a spreadsheet, you got to go and get a column from the fire department, column from the police department, column from the tax department, column from the inspections department, column from the, all these different city governments. And then you go outside of the government and get data from Zillow, get data from the census, get data from the IRS. And all you have to do is put that in one big spreadsheet and push a button. Okay. And it's so easy. You can save hundreds of lives. Now, if it was that easy, you'd think everyone was doing it. It's actually kind of hard, but the hard part's not the math. The hard part is getting all these people to cooperate. And that's why as a data scientist, you won't be able to get anybody to cooperate. You have to have human skills. You have to know how to persuade people. You have to inspire people. You have to know how to lead people. You have to know how to tap into people's emotions, people's goals, people's ambitions. Those of you who go off and just become pure data scientists, fantastic. Everybody needs you. But if you can combine that with an understanding of people and of organizations and of real economic problems, you'll be unstoppable. Okay? So that's it. I had to kind of rush through, but this is just to give you a little taste and a teaser of the kind of stuff that we talk about in this class. It's real world stuff. It's applicable stuff you can take with you and put to use almost right away. Happy to take any more questions.
Professor, do you mind to share the screen where, like the previous two, where you had some, there you go. The one has a box for GIS or something, the different, this one?
This one?
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So just to give you another example, PG&E, we had lost $40 billion last year because they didn't inspect they didn't trim the trees in the area where there were forest fires. And their excuse was that they didn't have enough budget to trim all the trees. And it's like, well, you don't have to trim all the trees. You just have to trim the trees that are likely to catch fire. You're like, well, how are we going to know? Do we have a crystal ball? It's like, yeah, you do have a crystal ball. It's called data. Okay. Right. You can go and look at where the fires have been, go and look at, where there have been failures, you go and look at where the trees are. There's all sorts of things. It's a lot of it's there. And then you prioritize, say, okay, we're going to do these first, then these, then these, then these. Okay. And the same thing with COVID, right? I mean, we have people that are at very, very, they're very, very, very vulnerable. And there's people that aren't vulnerable at all, but we treat them all the same because we don't feel comfortable with numbers. We don't feel comfortable with data. Okay. The economists just put up. Yeah, go ahead.
I have another question. For this course, would we use any previous data, previous cases to analyze data on our own?
Yes, you will get some cases, some data sets that you'll play around with in a software that's it's called Big ML, and it's a kind of a data science in a box. It's very easy to use. It's like drag and drop stuff. It's not no coding, no Python or R, MATLAB or anything involved.
Yeah, Professor Greg, I think maybe I can introduce more about the summer opportunity for our students to study with you.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for the great trial class. Professor Greg's super busy, but thank you for spending the time with our students and parents. And thank you also for all the students, you did great participation, and especially, Iris and Harry did very good interaction. Seems you're very interested in this topic. And also other students, I saw your faces, very listen very carefully. So maybe Greg, you can stop sharing and I can reshare my slides so that I can share the program details with our students. Yeah, as Greg mentioned, if you are interested in data science, interested to know how data, is changing our world and how to better use data to support your future, business decisions or, have more people skills. This is the chance for you to, let me fully share my screen. Okay, so this summer, we offer actually limit number, we can accept a limit number of students to do the data strategy research program with Professor Greg LeBlanc. So students will learn the fundamental of data science and also machine learning algorithms and learn why and how data science help people make optimized business decisions. So we only target at high school students, who are interested in business, data science, STEM, economics, finance, actually, all kinds of major. We are willing you to, we are actually open for you to apply because data science and also data strategy can be applied to all kinds of majors in the future. And so that's why, if you're interested in any of those majors, I think data strategy can be the area for you to further explore. And last year, we do have some exception for 8th graders. They're very advanced 8th grader students. So I also encourage you to try to apply. But majority of the students, we actually take our high school students. And then it will be a 5-week program from June 14th. So right after actually you finish your schoolwork and then the beginning of the summer, and then all the way till July 16th. And then each week, we will meet 3 times. We will meet on Tuesdays for lectures. So that's when Professor Greg LeBlanc is going to teach you the skills and knowledges about data science. And then on Thursday, we're going to have a one-on-one office hour for group research. So Caitlin, you ask a very good question. We are going to not only learn those skills, but we also going to apply those skills into your own research projects, but it's the group research. So your group will be like divided into different breakout rooms and to spend time with Professor Greg to provide one-on-one customized guidance for your research topic. And then every Friday, we will also have lab sessions that's usually led by our teaching assistant and also research assistant. They're usually the undergraduate or graduate students who study data science in those top universities like Stanford or UC Berkeley. And they're going to teach you how to use the software BigML to do data analysis. So we don't require you have any coding skills because we are going to use the softwares, but we do actually hope that you can have very good understanding about math and statistics, know how to use those softwares to really analyze data, clean data, analyze data, and also get the prediction out of those data analysis. And then each week, besides 3 meetings, we're also going to have assignments, we'll have a lot of supplemental readings for you to have like a foundation for statistics. And we'll also give you some like practice or introduction for how to use the BigML software. And we also have some group project and also the research paper for you to work on your research paper. So that's the basic structure for the program. And this is the overview of what you're going to learn with those within the 5 weeks. So first week, we're going to give an introduction for data science and also data strategy. And then starting from the second week to the 4th week, we're going to teach you the skills and also the theory part about data analysis skills like decision trees and also regression models, evaluation, and also some classical machine learning algorithms. And besides that, each week we are also going to do lots of case studies like what you did just now. Greg is going to share some case studies in marketing, finance, industry, logistics, operation, or HR. We're going to do the case studies for you to better understand how to apply those skills into your own research topics. And then during the last week, we're going to have a final presentation of your research findings. And also after 5-week program, we will give you some feedback for your research topics and also give you maybe 1 or 2 more weeks to finish your research paper. So this is like a rare chance for you to interact with a university level professor directly for such a unique and also a really hot topic. And then, not only you're going to take classes, but it's more like there's a hot discussion and also interaction over the class. We did see that last year, students, they had really good chemistry with each other and also with the professor, and they apply all those knowledge immediately into the real world case analysis and also their own research topics. And then we're also going to teach you hands-on training in software tools such as BigML and Data Robot. And then we also will help you try to finalize a research paper, which you can use to kind of like submit as the supplement essay or supplement materials in your college application, or we can also provide some resources for you to publish your academic research paper. And then top students in the class, we will also give you the chance to get recommendations letters from professor. So last year we had top 20%, and this year we need to further discuss with the professor. But if you are a top performer in the program, you will have the chance to get recommendation letters. And this is like some students may be curious about, what research topics did the students do last year, right? So last year we had 5 groups in total, and then each group actually they have different major or interest focus. So for example, the first group, actually they're a group of students who are interested in finance and economics. So they did a really great research topic about Twitter and Google search trends, whether people can use Twitter and Google search trends as stock predictors. So they apply, they get the data from Google and also from Twitter and also from Yahoo Finance for 30 days, for 3 years, and then they analyze the data and get their prediction. And then the second group of people, actually, they're interested in like biomedical industries and also chemistry. So the topic they analyze actually also is very interesting. They analyze the microbiota, whether they can help assist individualized treatment in different hospitals. And then the third group, there are students who are interested in business and entrepreneurship. So the research topic for them is optimizing store layout with the RD card. And then for the fourth and fifth groups, there are students interested in computer science, STEM related areas. So they do some, and also finance. So they do some research about the semi-automated vehicles, or how to use data science to recommend car add-ons. So but through the program, we are going to put you into the group with the students who share similar interest. And also we are going to provide the guidance from the professor and also teaching assistant, research assistant to help you identify a research topic, and also to help you starting from collect the data, try to search the data, collect data, and analyze data with the software we learn in the class. And actually, the application is very competitive. We have 2 rounds of evaluations. So if you're interested in this program, this is the link, and I'm also going to send that to the chat box for you to submit your first round application. And then we're going to do the evaluation together with professor to select the ones who can go into the second round evaluation. So for the second round, you're going to write application essay, you're going to submit your transcript, your resume, and then some students, they also need an interview to further prove their eligibility for this program. And then after the second round evaluation, we're going to issue the admission result. And for those students who are selected into the program, we're going to give you the admission letter. And then for some students, we may put you on the wait list because seats are limited, and we do rolling admission. So in February, we already finished the early bird admission. I think around like 20 students submit the application, and we actually issued 7, I think, admissions so far for early round, and then we still have a couple seats available. So if you're interested in this program, I encourage you to apply as soon as possible, because usually, the competition will become more competitive if you submit later, and then sometimes seats already run out, if you apply like in late April or in May. So that's the application process. And as I mentioned, I'm going to share the link to the chat box. Yeah, if you have any questions, for our programs, or want to know more details about how we do for the research program, you can definitely call us or, email us, or if any parents, you have the WeChat, you can also scan the QR code to ask any questions. Okay, so let me put the application form in the chat. And any students and parents, if you have more questions for professor, or you have more questions for the research program, you can feel free to open your microphone and we can do the Q&A.
Well, before you start with your presentation, I was actually going to ask about data organization and how you're able to create a software like that. Yeah.
You mean the software that we're going to use?
More specifically, how do bigger companies organize their data?
Well, yeah, I mean, data governance, as they call it, is really, really, really important at a lot of companies. Like, how do you collect it? How do you store it? How do you organize it? How do you label it? Right. So if it's not labeled, it's very difficult to make sense of it. And so data science really comes in at the very end of the process. So there's data engineering, right? And that's really what that's really what the engineers do. There's and those folks do most of the work. Like, by the time you get to the point where you're doing data science, 90% of the work has already been done. So I didn't want to understate the importance of all that stuff, the data cleaning and data munging. And I mean, a lot of data is really, just to go back to that HR example, when the companies were looking at employees to figure out like who was a good employee, who was a bad employee. Well, when someone leaves a company, did they get fired or did they quit? Like, different companies use different ways of labeling that. And so you've got to get in there and figure out like, okay, what does this mean? This person left the company. Were they fired? Did they quit? Like, what really happened? And so especially when you're taking data from a bunch of different companies and putting it together, it's often very inconsistent. There's also errors. There's like blank cells. Like, what do you do when there's a blank cell? Suppose you have a building in that New York database. It starts off as a single address and then it splits up into like 8 different apartments, right? Somewhere in the middle. what do you do? Like, how do you manage that? So all that stuff is super, super, super difficult. And we're just going to kind of skip over all that. I mean, because we don't have time. It's just so complicated. So we're going to kind of import relatively simple data sets into our software and then play around with it. But we don't want to gloss over that very, very difficult part of the whole data science project.
I have another question. So like from what you said, like it seems really powerful, like the whole data science thing. Like in your opinion, what are some limitations nowadays? Well,
there's a lot of common errors and mistakes that people make, right? So for instance, the most common is confusing correlation with causation. So for instance, suppose that you were to notice a very strong correlation between the number of fire trucks at a particular fire and the amount of monetary damage experienced by that fire. Okay, so you would see a lot of correlation. And so, you might draw from that a conclusion like, hey, stop sending so many fire trucks out because you're just causing more damage. Right? And that sounds really silly because we all know that the causation goes the other way. But there's countless examples of where data scientists do make that same mistake because they just don't understand the causal mechanism. So correlation causation is one way that people make mistakes. There's another thing called like data leakage and bias. And there's just so many ways that people can make mistakes. So that's what makes, models bad. Now, in terms of dangerous, if you think about dangerous, well, those mistakes can be, there's a slide in here that I showed that people who, you can predict whether someone's going to get arrested based on their national ID photo in China. So you can look at their ID photo and run it through an algorithm, and you can say, okay, this person's more likely to get arrested than this person's not, just based on facial features. Now, we don't know whether that actually corresponds to underlying personality traits or not. Like, that hasn't been tested. So it could be that they're just getting arrested because they look like a criminal, right? We have that in the US too. Like when you come up for parole, you've been arrested for a crime, come up for parole, and they use a algorithm to figure out whether you're more likely to commit a crime. And if you are, they throw you back in prison. And if you're not, then they let you out. But those algorithms have a lot of problems, a lot of flaws. And it can have, it's not just like what cat video do you see on your news feed. Like this is real important stuff. And so we need to be super careful. Or even the government, we decide when the army is dropping bombs in Iraq, they use algorithms to predict like, hey, this is where we think the Taliban is like hanging out, and it could be a school, and then you kill kids because your algorithms are wrong. So there's some super important consequences if you don't get it right. But of course, the alternative to that is using people, and people get it wrong too. So you have to figure out, which is more likely to get it right, which is more likely to get it wrong. Tesla is probably, once autonomous driving kicks in with Tesla, the accident rate on a Tesla is going to be far lower than the accident rate of a human driven car. But people will still be afraid. In fact, if humans kill 10 times as many people as Teslas, people will still sue Tesla and say, you algorithm, it's a bad algorithm and so forth. So society isn't always ready for the robots to do the work. Would you want a robot doing surgery for you? You're probably like, well, I don't really want a robot. But then when you look at the statistics and, then you're like, maybe I do want a robot, maybe they do a better job, right? Let the human talk to me, not a doctor, but like a like a public health worker can talk, and then the algorithm can diagnose my illness. So we'll talk about some of these issues in class for sure.
I have a question. So I was looking at the slide with the past students projects, and I know for the first one, like Google and Twitter, I think it's data is a little bit easier because I know for like COVID cases, Google does display that like a day-by-day case number. Yeah. But I'm wondering what projects was data more difficult to find, and how did the students find data for those topics?
So not every project actually used data. So some were like business model ideas, right? And they were just saying like, hey, this is what we think this company should do. We think they should go get this data and then use it for this way. And then they didn't actually collect any data for the final project. Right. So the car case, I think the car example, correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, I don't think there was any data there. It was just a And the shopping cart example, they didn't have any actual shopping data. They did, it was kind of like, yeah, they didn't have any actual like store data. They just said, hey, this is we want to have these carts because we think these carts could capture the data. And then once you have the data, you can do all sorts of stuff. So it doesn't have to be a data project. It can be a business project.
Oh, I have kind of a follow-up question. So I think in your earlier slides, you talked about kind of creating a model or at least testing it. So if they don't have any like real data, are the students like generating their own data? And if so, how would they do that?
No, but what you'd want to do in your proposal is say, like, here's how you would evaluate whether this is a good idea. So, you know, here's how you would collect the data, and here's how you would evaluate whether it's useful. So that if someone does adopt that suggestion, then they can, you know, accept it or reject it without having to spend a huge amount of money. That's how we do startups nowadays. All startups are low-cost experiments to find out if there's, you know, if there's demand. So you don't, again, you don't have, for the final project, you don't actually have to work with data. You know, you're gonna be working with data for the homeworks, but not necessarily for the final project. Because it's a strategy class, right? Data science and data strategy, the two together.
I have another question. So like for the past 5 projects that I saw, like I felt like it was like the topic was like all like more leaning towards like the economic, like kind of like STEM side. But like personally, I'm like more interested like in some like humanity subjects. So like I was wondering if there's like any application in those areas.
Absolutely. So the digital humanities is becoming a huge thing right now in a lot of universities, right? So it's basically, I mean, first of all, there's the humanistic aspect of like, how do you incorporate machine learning into the workflow? How do you know, what are the societal implications, ethical implications, blah, blah, blah. But also just in the humanities, like if you're an English professor now, you don't just like read a book, you know, you basically go and comb through the entire Google library looking for patterns, right? So you're trying to see like, you know, suppose you're interested in the history of you know, women in the Middle Ages. You know, you go in there and look for words that correspond to female property ownership or something, or you'll go and look through, you know, all this stuff. And so what's called digital humanities is all using data. That's why here at Berkeley, we make even the poetry majors have to take a data class, right? I mean, you have to know how to work with all these books. I mean, there's been a lot of books written. So you don't just read one, you know, you read a whole bunch.
Going off Luna's question, I noticed that from all the projects that you guys showed us that there is a wide variety of interest here, which is great. I'm just wondering, how are you guys going to be able to put us into teams? Is there some kind of exercise you guys use to put us into those sort of unique sectors?
Yeah, we're going to do a pre-class survey, you know, to collect your personal interest and also your major interest and any achievement you've already had before, and then any, you know, research topics you may be interested in. So according to those pre-class surveys, we're going to put you into the right group.
And then when we were divided into group, like presumably like the students will talk about like what are some stuff they want to do. Yeah.
Yeah, you already do the brainstorming about any research topic you want to focus on. Yeah, and I see.
Yeah, university, I mean, look, when you go to university, if you're just sitting in a cubicle working by yourself, then you're not getting the most out of the university, right? So, you know, high school, a lot of times you're studying by yourself at home, and in university, it's not like that. I mean, you study in groups, you do projects in groups, you work in groups, particularly in business school, engineering.
Yes, I see another student, Jaden, you raised your hand. Yeah, you can feel free to open your microphone and ask any.
Oh, yes. Are you able to hear me first?
Yeah, there's some echo, but we can hear you.
Okay. So I have a question about the research topics. So are these topics things that the students are assigned, or topics that they're...
You pick them.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, your group will discuss what, you know, what you're interested in, and then find something, right, to get you in the habit of, you know, being curious about the world, saying, hey, I wonder about this. Let's go find out. Right? I mean, I wish I could turn my camera around. I have just piles of hundreds of books. I do a podcast now. I'm doing 4 podcasts a week, and so I have to read. I have to read a lot of books. So, you know, when I learn about something, I just call somebody up and I say, hey, I want to learn about this, or hey, I want to learn about this, or hey, I want to learn about this, or hey, I want to learn about this, you know, or this, and then I go read all the books, and then I call them up and I interview them, and you know, that's how I find out about stuff. You know, I don't like wait for somebody to assign me a list of books. I go find the books that I want to read and go read them.
Yeah, any other questions from parents and students? Because we already keep professor for a long time, you know, past our one hour webinar time. So we will stay for another maybe 3 minutes for the last 2 or 3 questions.
I have another question if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
So are the research topics supposed to be like strictly centered around data, or can it be like something like about like space or something?
Well, space, most of the, I'd say 20% of the data scientists that I meet are former astrophysicists, because astrophysicists are working with massive amounts of data. You know, suppose you're trying to find a new star. Well, you know, you got to comb through a lot of data. You want to look for radio waves from some outer, you know, alien in the middle of nowhere, you got to use a lot of data. So, you know, astronomy and astrophysics are very, very, very data intensive. So, you know, I'm sure you could, if you're that's super passionate about that topic and you get other people in the group that are, you could probably find some kind of topic that would work. But, you know, it has to be, you have to have some kind of practical application. It can't just be curiosity about like, oh, I wonder what, you know, Mars is made out of. Like, why would you want to know? Like, what's the, that's one of the reasons why I quit astrophysics, because I was just, no matter what I did, I couldn't change anything. It's like, the planets are going to do what they do, you know, and nothing I do is going to change it. I'm just watching it, you know, and recording it. But if you're someone like Elon Musk, then you're like, oh yeah, we're going to go and, you know, plant green beans on Mars, you know. So he's trying to answer, he's trying to do something. He's not just trying to understand it, he's trying to actually make a difference.
Yeah, next, Anne, you can feel free to ask your question.
Thanks for the session. I'm a parent, but I'm excited just by listening. Professor has to show everything. I wish I was having this opportunity when I was young. But question, I have 2 kids we are interested. I suppose you, not only the application, but all the fee, everything you, is it on your website or?
Yeah, so try to fill in the application form first, because we actually do offer some scholarship for you know, early bird and some great students. So we're going to send you the full brochure of all the program details through email, you know. So try to contact us first. If you pass the first round evaluation, you're going to receive, or you know, just call us for any program details.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
I'm going to resend the application link to the chat box. Okay, I see. Yeah, is there any other, maybe one last question?
Yeah, I have a question. This is kind of personal based, but I started this mathematical model system for myself. It was to analyze just blood clots and INR ratios, predict that, but it's very individualized. So I was wondering, I will kind of wanted to spread it out more, and I was thinking about getting some data based on medical records, but would there be any recommendations? Is there any way for me to access that, or is that like?
I mean, that's a good, that would be a pretty important part of your project, right? Trying to figure out how do you get this data. You know, medical records are pretty hard to come by. You know, you can get anonymized versions of them. You might be able to find some research institute that has some data.
Okay.
But you know, that's like I mentioned, that the data science part is the easy part. The hard part is getting the data. So, you know, if you can figure out a way. So what did you say this is about, thrombosis, or what is it?
No, so my grandma actually has a blood clot issue, and so she has to visit the hospital like every 3 weeks, and that's something.
I think that's thrombosis. I think that's what it's called, isn't it?
No, it's just, well, she just has to take a bunch of different medicines and
Dinners, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if you're able to predict, it would be hard to get the data, but if you can get the data, that'd be great. I mean, you could get survey data. You could send something out as, if you have a hypothesis, you could try and get survey data. Just send out something, find a chat group, a community group, like a support group out there of people who have clots, you know, and then just send out a survey in Qualtrics and see what they say. You know, that could, it would be observational data. It wouldn't be experimental, but that's fine. But you got to be creative about getting data, particularly PII. So most medical data is PII, personal identifiable information. So it needs to get anonymized.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you, Greg, for the fantastic trial class. And it's very, I think, inspiring, and not only to the students, but also to the parents, you know, as some parents also mentioned that. So I'm resharing the slide of our contact information. Okay. You can scan our QR code. I will stay here for longer, but thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
I'll see you later.
Great weekend. And looking forward to receiving your applications, and looking forward to seeing you this summer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.